This is the BBC.
Come on. Wait, no, is it a girl or him? We are playing a game called Overwatch. I've never played it before, but it's kind of like a colourful first-person shooter.
Respawn.
Triple kill.
OP.
Laggy.
Level up. XP.
This guy. You wrecked him as Tracer, I wrecked him as gonna make it.
Some of our listeners there with examples of the language they use around today's subject on Word of Mouth. We're talking about an industry that makes £74 billion a year worldwide, dwarfing the cinema and movie businesses. It's video games. According to recent figures from the industry trade body, UKIE, that's UKIE, games are now played by 50% of the UK population. That figure rises to 99% among 8 to 15-year-olds. So it's time we took a look at the impact video games might be having on language. With me in the studio, as always, is Dr. Laura Wright of the University of Cambridge, and we're joined today by Esther McCallum-Stewart, Associate Professor in Games Research at the University of Staffordshire, whose work examines how players interact and tell stories about themselves and the worlds they play in. And with Esther is Rhianna Pratchett, a scriptwriter for video games, story designer and narrative paramedic. Welcome to you both. Rhianna, can I start with what is a narrative paramedic?
It basically means a writer who is brought in very late in the development process of a game when all they can really do is try and keep it alive. So it's usually a kind of flagging story that hasn't really been given love and attention through the development process. Or they suddenly remembered that maybe they should have a story in there and they desperately get hold of a writer to try and breathe life into the story.
I think Hollywood calls them script doctors, I think, isn't it? I think so, isn't it? Yes. So you're very similar to that.
To a degree, yes, but the games traditionally have not been story-led in the past, and so now we've got a lot more focus on story.
So let me get an idea. How long have you been gaming for, both of you? Let's start with you, Esther. Yes.
So we're actually both about the same age. I've been playing for about 25 years, which means I actually came slightly late to games because I started in my teenage years. And I started off playing games that were called point-and-click games, where you point the cursor, you click, and you solve puzzles like that. I played a fantastic game called Monkey Island.
And Rhianna, how long do you reckon you've been at it?
Since I was about 6. I started very young. 'Cause, I was an only child and my dad was very into electronics and robotics and computers. And he brought home a Sinclair ZX81, an old chunky black and white machine. And he showed me this game on it that I think I was initially quite afraid of, and it was called Mazogs, and it was a little pixelated man in a little pixelated maze being sort of chased by little pixelated crabby creatures. And I think that scared me to start with until I realised the little pixelated man can pick up a little pixelated sword and fight back. And that, being able to kind of fight back and stand up for yourself, I think that resonated, and it was the start of a long-term love affair.
Very good. So,
how about you, Michael? How long have you been gaming?
Well, I find playing the football one, FIFA, that sort of thing, I get slightly dizzy. But going back to the 90s, my boys then played Tekken 3, quite a lot of killing, quite a lot of Japanese men shouting sort of, Mitsubishi, dead, except that's a car, so it's probably not right. Suzuki, killed, that sort of thing. But I mentioned at the start, games are now played by 50% of the UK population. That's a lot of people. So that's people like former Prime Minister David Cameron, who is reported to be a fan of Fruit Ninja, and MP Tom Watson, who's a champion for the industry in the Houses of Parliament, distinguished authors such as Salman Rushdie and J.K. Rowling, who's said to enjoy a bit of Minecraft. I remember SimCity. I always sort of think Minecraft's like a kind of superior SimCity, perhaps. Have I said the wrong thing? You looked slightly shocked when I said that, Rhianna. I sort of panicked. I've said some taboo thing. For those of us who don't play, all right, and I don't play a lot, I have to admit, go on, tell me, what am I missing?
They're huge, and I think it's interesting that it's 50% because you get on the train and you see all of these people, they're all on their mobile phones, they're all playing their little games on their own, and they're just taking a bit of time during their commute to not talk to people. But then you'll go home and you'll see, people who are playing on their PCs or maybe on their iPads, and they're doing a lot more communication. They're meeting people from around the world. They're getting together with them and they're killing dragons. I mean, how amazing is that? You get to be a hero in your own world. So it's real fantastic escape.
Very attractive.
Can I add in that in My Singing Monsters, you don't have to kill the dragon. You can hatch a baby dragon.
Singing Monsters? Sorry?
My Singing Monsters, where you hatch little baby monsters.
Is that the name of the game?
Yeah, they sing. You build your own orchestra.
Tell us about the word game, Laura.
Well, game and also gamble are from the same Old English root, which meant exactly then what it means now. And we've always liked gaming. There are place names named after gaming. So Gainfield in Berkshire, for example, is a field where games were played. Plaistow in East London is a place where you played. A stow where you did playing of some sort or other. And gamble as a verb has always, it seems, been a pejorative thing, as in people telling you not to do it. I'm just hearing in the background here a zillion parents saying, get off that game box, stop gaming. I'm giving you a quote here from 1757. Great people who should be the guardians of the poor are wasting their time and their money gambling with their own grooms. Well, amusement arcades are surprisingly old. The phrase gambling machine dates from at least the 1780s. There's a catalogue with an advert which goes morning and evening amusements at Merlin's Mechanical Museum.
Nice alliteration there.
Number 11, Princes Street, Hanover Square. Admission every day during the whole year, Sundays accepted, from 11 till 3 o'clock. At £0.50. Now, this was John Joseph Merlin, and he was inviting the folk to come there and spend at his gambling machine. If you were visiting London, this was one of the attractions that was a must-see. You would want to see the Tower of London, you would want to see the British Museum, and you would want to see Merlin's Mechanical Museum.
Well, I think things have moved on quite a bit since then. I'm not absolutely sure. But Esther, there are many different platforms and devices that you can access games on now. Just tell us about some of those, just so that we're all in the know.
The different devices that we have really dictate the way that we communicate with games. So you can put on a headset and, your fingers might be very, very busy, but you can communicate very fast with them. Or perhaps you've got a PC, so suddenly you have access to a keyboard and now you can actually type instructions, maybe a slightly slower form of game or a game that you have to prepare for. A lot of computer games have very sophisticated communication devices on them so that you can perhaps talk verbally, but you can also talk on multiple what are known as channels. So you might have 3 or 4 of these. You might be talking to one big group of people and you might be whispering to your friend at the same time, so you have an individual conversation with someone else. And these are colour coded sometimes, so perhaps green will be all of your friends together and blue will be a very small group of them, and then the whisper will be that very quiet pink.
But this is very sophisticated, because I've got to be carrying on conversations, I mean, just keep it as simple as that, with several types of people all at the same time. I've got to hold these in my head. They're operating in all these different levels then, aren't they?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the sort of interesting things is that it sometimes speeds or slows conversations. So say somebody decides to have a private conversation with you, that might take place across the course of an evening, whereas you're also suddenly having a very immediate conversation about something that's going on the screen. Again, maybe you have a dragon to kill and there's 20 of you and you're all together, you're all from different countries around the world, but you're all communicating on the same channels. And so language has evolved very closely in order to accommodate that for those kind of fast, slow moments.
How do you mean? In what ways has it affected language? I mean, I can hear rate of delivery.
You pick up words, and certainly I used to play World of Warcraft, and I suddenly realised there is a lot of language used in World of Warcraft, abbreviations. If you've got a kind of a group of you doing one particular segment of the game, which are often called raids, you would be talking to each other as you were playing. You will be sort of strategizing. Maybe if you wanted to go away from the keyboard, you might just type AFK, because it would be important for your team to know. If you're in a small group, then
AFK meaning just
away from keyboard.
Oh right, so I type in AFK. I'm going off to the loo now. Well, you won't say that. I'll just write AFK.
You don't need to give details. No.
AFK
I could be going shopping for toilet rolls instead, rather than actually going to the loo. Yeah. And are there any other key terms to do with, like, when the game starts, when it's finished, or how do we talk about these things?
There's lots of different things that evolved out of games. Just things like ding. When you just write ding when you've gone up a level.
So I've gone up a level. I've gone to level 9, and I'm so pleased with it. I write.
You write ding, and everyone goes, "Oh, congratulations!" Because that's actually the sound the game makes.
And do you write congratulations, or is there a way of saying high five?
You probably just say congrats or something like that. But it's just to let the
Mazel tov,
your guild, which is the people that are in your kind of chat channel, the people you do.
Going up levels in schools is called levelling up. Is it called levelling up in gaming as well? That would be quite funny.
Come directly from gaming.
I think you've also got epic fail, which has kind of come into politics,
yes,
I think.
Yeah, that would be
politicians accuse each other of epic fails, I think.
That's definitely from what we call MMORPG, so massively multiplayer online role-playing game.
I like that, yes. All right, so let's just whiz through one or two more. I think you've got noob. What's a noob?
A new player, or just a player that is demonstrating amateurish play tactics.
Yes. Esther, can you give us any? I think I've got here laggy. What's that mean?
So laggy comes from the actual game itself slowing down, or your particular version of the game slowing down. So you need to signal to other people that your character is perhaps moving a bit more slowly. And that's often done by actually typing it in a lengthened form. So you say lag as you actually type it. Which
Very
is
concrete
sort of,
poetry, yes.
Absolutely,
I like
yeah.
that.
And it sort of describes what's actually happening to
Laggy.
you. So BRB is another one, which
that
means
one?
be right back. We have things like that are misspells. Words that you have to type very quickly that get frequently misspelt have become words in themselves. So KK is another one, which means okay.
Are there any other verbal cues? I mean, not words as such.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve Conway calls this spill cries.
Let's hear a clip. I think there might be some non-verbal sounds on this one, I think.
Wait. Yes, melee. Yeah. Oh. No. That's one block. Click. No. I'm getting there.
So not many words there, quite a lot of non-verbal noises and communication going on.
Steve Conway calls these things spill cries. Even if you're sitting on a sofa next to somebody, you're concentrating on the game, you're looking forwards. So you need to really telegraph what it is that you're doing. You need to show that you're excited. You need to show that the most dreadful thing has happened. You've just died in the game. So you groan and you cheer and you sort of whoop in order to, again, telegraph your excitement and enjoyment of the game to other people. One of the really useful things about spill cries is it also shows that you're having fun. That you understand.
So we're bonding here.
Absolutely.
We're having fun together.
Yeah, you understand that this is a competition sometimes. You understand that this is quite a sort of aggressive in the moment thing, but at the same time, it's just a game. So making all these elaborate kind of, woo, fantastic, yeah, noises,
Yes.
Oh.
Well, it sounds like me watching football, so
It's
yes,
exactly
it's
the same kind of
same,
thing.
isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, it's
yeah.
communicative.
Definitely, yes.
From a
absolutely.
linguistic point of view, those are words. They may not have spellings, but you know
Yes.
what they mean.
If we sit down
in
and eat
context.
and go, then that says to my guests or other people, or I'm a guest, and
Surprisingly
say,
nice.
I am enjoying this, yes.
I was interested to hear you say telegraphing there, because abbreviating and condensing and leaving bits out and telegraphing, these are nothing new. I mean, these are normal things that people do when communicating with each other. 18th century advertisers in newspaper columns, they had to pay by the word. So you're going to telegraph your meaning. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely expensive. Older listeners will remember the telegram, which was equally very expensive. You paid it by the word. So a telegram would go, ladybird, stop. Fly home, stop. House fire, stop. And the flip side of that is that if you're very wealthy, of course, you can pay for all these words. You can put your subordinate clauses and your prepositions and what have you back in because you don't mind about the money. Let me give you an example that I took from your alphabet book, Michael, under T for telegram. If you were a Hollywood star, going to Hollywood parties is quite an important part of the job, and they would send invitations by telegram because, of course, they are very well paid. This is Lauren Bacall congratulating Leonard Bernstein on West Side Story. Listen to how much money she spent on her telegram. She wrote, "It was worth all the Dexamil. It's a smash. You're a smash, and I'm thrilled for you. Blessings and love, Betty." So she's paid for 21 words there. She could have done it in 6. She could have said, "Dexamil worth it, stop. Smash, stop. Thrilled, stop, Betty."
It could be one of your, what are they called again?
Narrative paramedic.
Yeah, so just watch out, Laura, you'll end up as one of those, yes.
I think I like the sound of that.
Yes. So we've seen an abbreviation of language in response to technological advances before. Similarly, we know subcultures have always had a vocabulary, a lexicon that grows with them. But all this sounds quite elaborate. Are there game-specific dialects? Can we say that? I've heard of something about Martian.
There are sort of multiple different versions of it. It's a language that's used by Mandarin speakers, and again, it's a letter, word, stroke, phonic substitution. So it's used to get over censorship when Mandarin players are writing to each other.
In China?
In China, yes. And it's been quite controversial because obviously the Chinese government are not particularly keen that people are communicating in a language that they don't really understand.
The authorities don't understand.
And so the authorities
don't game?
The authorities do game, which is why they have made measures to try and prevent this being spoken. But because it's an evolving language, then it has moved across
keeps one
places.
step ahead.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That's the nature of seditious communication, isn't it?
Very much so.
Well, there's a perception that games are designed mainly by white middle-class young men. Is that true?
There's a lot of them, to be fair.
Strange breed.
Much as there are in TV or the film industry at the moment, there are
comedy.
more women coming in all the time, but it's still sort of a predominantly male-developed industry.
Does that have an impact on the language?
It's been more so in the past, particularly in the way games were marketed. Now we tend to have a little less gendered marketing. For example, Lara Croft in the past used to be marketed very much towards a male gamer, even though in the games she's appealing to all genders
and she's
of players.
She.
Yeah. It has an effect on the characters in games. So we've seen a lot of white, male, dark-haired, gravelly-voiced protagonist characters, particularly in Western development.
With North American accents, presumably.
Quite often, but it's sort of the gaming everyman character that was sort of repeated across games. And now, games are trying to become a bit more diverse. We're seeing a lot more female characters coming in. We're seeing, different ethnicities of protagonists coming in. There's still a lot of work to be done, but, the industry is slowly evolving in the way that film, and especially TV, which has been making great grounds with diversity at the moment, are doing.
And let's talk a bit about the sort of militaristic aspect. A lot of the games, or we could say the vocabulary itself, seems to draw from warfare, Warcraft. Obviously, people are playing for fun. Does this sort of war context, this war discourse, if you like, does it have real-world applications?
Military institutions have been using gaming simulation pretty much since they were formed. It's an incredibly common way of getting people who are in combat to understand how war works. And obviously it's within what's known in gaming terms as the magic circle. You're within a safe zone. And once you step into that, the rules are different, things change, and you can experiment within that.
Without actually anybody dying.
Yeah. Yes. So you can look at case scenarios or things that might happen. But one of the things that has been recently pushed out is UNESCO have a call out at the moment where they're looking at what's called Games for Change, where they're facilitating the creation and the distribution of social impact games, of games that talk about, what would it be like if there wasn't any oil in the world? And UNESCO are also trying to experiment with bringing groups together and getting them to actually be in the same place. Because once people are actually in the same room together, then obviously they're communicating in a very different way. And if they're there playing games, even if they're playing computer games together, then they communicate and they learn different things from each other.
In those games, is there another kind of vocabulary that's come out in the humanitarian game? So let's say, let's solve this epidemic. Let's say there's an Ebola epidemic or something. I don't know.
That's actually a really good example because there is a board game called Pandemic, which is all about solving pandemics, about solving outbreaks. And again, board gaming, slightly different from video gaming, but a code of discussion and communication has evolved around that.
You've talked, I think, Esther, about reading games. Indeed, I always use the analogy of football, that, that a manager will say, well, I'm reading the game.
When you're studying a game, you tend to sort of embed yourself within it, so you actually see yourself as the player. So we talk about things like walkthroughs, where people will record walking through the game, and that will be their reading of it. If this was a literary analysis, you'd definitely say, I read the text. But we tend to say we played the text because that's actually what we were doing. We were immersing ourselves in it and becoming involved as a result of that.
Rhianna, you won the Writers Guild of America Award for Achievement in Video Game Writing, in fact, in 2016 for Lara Croft, Rise of the Tomb Raider, as well as other awards. You got a BAFTA nomination for Heavenly Sword. Some of this now is leading into narrative storytelling. I mean, there was a story, I'm thinking all the way back to the 90s now when I played Tekken 3, there was a narrative because you had to choose your combatants, and then we had a fight, and then somebody won. Well, that is a narrative, isn't it? But it has developed beyond that.
It definitely has. When I first entered the industry as a journalist about 18 years ago, the question bouncing around the industry was, should games use professional writers? And I thought, well, they're using professional artists and professional programmers. Why would you put anything into a professional product that's not done by someone?
Why did they think not? Why?
Because there's always this feeling, and I think this goes across all entertainment mediums, that everyone knows how to write, so everyone must know how to write a story.
We all read a story, so we can write one.
And that's pretty much how it was in games. And obviously games were gameplay-led, and games need to be gameplay-led. So during my time in the industry, stories just taken a lot more seriously. I mean, tech can only get you so far, and if you have story and world building and character creation, that's something that can really differentiate your games. And so that's brought more focus on writers, on narrative designers, on cinematic directors, on storyboard artists, and throughout the industry, developers, publishers, press, gamers themselves, they're taking storytelling much more seriously.
And your father was, of course, I think I draw attention to this, was Terry Pratchett. Writing for games must be very different from writing a book, yes? I mean, it is different, or is it not?
Oh, absolutely. It's the other end of the spectrum. And I don't think my father really ever understood the difficulties that games writers go through, because I'd tell him about some of the difficulties on projects and he would be like, but why don't they just listen to you? You're the writer. I thought, well, that's how you
And what did you
operate.
say to him?
Because there's so many other people with, a stake in it that usually have more power than the writer, unfortunately. With books, it's just the author, and it's just, they may have an editor further down the line, but it's them controlling their world. With writers, they are more like a cog in a machine. They're having to work with teams of people that could be like 300 or 400 people. And no, they might not care about narrative.
But
they
that
might
makes
not be
it sound
interested.
your job quite difficult. If you're coming in late in the day as what you call a paramedic, to presumably put right what's gone wrong before, you've got 300 strangers all with some kind of stake in not having their bit cut out.
Thankfully, narrative paramedic gigs are not so common as they used to be. So the industry has cottoned on to the idea that actually involving writers early on to help build the world, to help use the mechanics of the game to support the story is a good idea. So writers are getting involved much earlier in the process, thankfully.
A theory emerged in the 1960s of the idea that when we read, we actually become the author of the text. But I'm listening to you now talking about the games. Is there a way in which we can say that the gamer, the person with the controls, are they in a way the author of the game?
Absolutely, that is a key element of gaming. The story is about what you do, how you go through the game, your journey. The things that the kind of game does in response to your actions might create a narrative that's quite unique to that
particular play.
Yeah, that particular playthrough. And if you're playing with lots of friends as well, that can create unique situations. You are kind of co-authoring the game with the player, and the way you shape the games and the game stories around the player's experience.
And I've got a little note on a word, barks, that is something in the language that you use. What are barks?
So barks are short lines of dialogue, usually said by the enemies you encounter in the game. So
Mitsubishi wins. It comes back to that. Yes.
that would be a bark.
Yes.
But also, if you're playing like a first-person shooter or a multiplayer shooting game, enemies saying things like reloading or flanking or he's over there. Well, someone's got to write that. Unfortunately, they probably have to write it 20 times
and
in
the
different
FIFA
ways.
football that I watch, there are these long, elaborate commentaries that have been pre-recorded by real people,
Yeah,
by people
absolutely.
like
That's
John
a
Motson
bark system.
and my hero Alan Smith, who I've quoted several times on Word of Mouth. And can you imagine anyone like you, say, winning a Nobel Prize for this? I mean, after all, we've had a musician, Bob Dylan, more than a musician, surely. But anyway, can you imagine a video game writer, creator that becomes Nobel Prize worthy?
With games, we're already seeing games that are about incredibly important social issues. We have games like Papers, Please, which is about the immigration crisis. It's only a matter of time, and absolutely, we should be regarding some games as an art form, if not all of them, for the different things that they do.
Papers, Please, just tell us a bit more about that one.
You take on the role of a border control officer in a fictional communist Eastern European country, and you're sitting in your little security booth, and people are coming through and they're passing you their passports, and you're having to check it for irregularities. And it's sort of gamifying bureaucracy, really.
In theory, you could have a game but it could be from the migrants' perspective, though, couldn't you? You know, getting across the Mediterranean,
In
things
some
like
ways
that.
it is, because they pass you memos. And there's one example where someone comes along and he says, look, I'm being trafficked and I need help. But if you help that person, again, there's consequences for it. And the consequences to you are always negative.
In literature, you always talk about point of view. They sometimes call it focalising. But you're doing your focalising through the border guard, aren't you? It's just the same
From
as
the
if
point of view of authority, not
Yeah.
from the point of view of the migrant. It's really interesting to hear about reality coming into the games. I look at medieval manuscripts. I work on stuff from the 1300s and 1400s. Now, most of the vocabulary has changed. So if I enter these words into Google over the last couple of decades, I would get 1 or 2 hits from the few people in the world who are interested in medieval manuscripts. In recent years, gamers have started uploading loads of names in particular. Yeah. You are getting really authentic nowadays. So
you're going medieval, guys.
Well, there will be real living Londoners from 1308 are now becoming your avatars, as it were.
One of the things that we do with our students is we run what are known as games jams, where they have to make games. And I've seen people use medieval things. For example, the snails that get drawn on the sides of manuscripts.
Yes.
They're very aggressive looking, those snails, and I've seen people make games about them.
Well,
so
the medieval world is hugely important, isn't it,
Yes.
for gaming?
It's very much used as a touchstone for representations of history.
So have you seen gamification in other areas? I'm seeing it in education. Do you see it elsewhere?
Absolutely. I think everywhere's doing it, particularly things that have apps. For example, there's a great running app called Zombies, Run, ! And it's a fitness app set against the backdrop of a zombie apocalypse. So you're kind of running around the streets of London and you're getting this narrative in your ears about what's happening during this zombie apocalypse.
I actually broke my leg very, very badly about 4 years ago now, a long time ago, but I rehabbed it using Zombies Run.
I was worried there. I thought
yes.
you broke the leg running away from zombies. Yes, that's right. Yeah, no, we all got that,
all
didn't
of
we?
these
Yeah.
games actually have a warning that says be very careful, make sure that you are actually paying attention to your surroundings. But there'd be these wonderful moments where I was on my crutches and you can hear them in the background. You can hear them kind of panting and wheezing, and it's very...
What is the sound of a zombie? Can we just hear the sound? Can you do that for us?
So there's panting, so there's kind of... And then it's...
Listeners, we heard it first on word of mouth. The sound of a zombie chasing somebody on crutches. You heard it here. And it's all we've got time for today. So my thanks to you, especially, sorry about this, Rhianna, but Esther McCallum Stewart for the zombies. Rhianna Pratchett, thank you. And, of course, Dr. Laura Wright. I won't say game over, I think, as arguably the game is never over, is it? So it'll just be AF